Two CIA officers are sitting in an unmarked van on Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C., whispering encouragement at a cat. The cat costs $20 million. It has a microphone in its ear canal, a radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and an antenna woven into its fur, running down its spine into its tail. It is, officially, a covert listening device of the United States government, and the Soviets never found out about it. Not because the mission stayed secret, because the mission lasted about 90 seconds. This is Acoustic Kitty, and like every great intelligence disaster, it starts with a memo. To understand why grown men with security clearances ended up wiring a cat, you have to understand the war they were losing. Not the Cold War, the audio war. In 1945, a group of Soviet schoolchildren presented the American ambassador in Moscow with a hand-carved wooden seal of the United States, a gift of friendship. He hung it in his study, in his own residence, and it stayed there for 7 years. It was a bug. Inside the carving sat a passive listening device designed by Leon Theremin. Yes, the man who invented the spooky electronic instrument from every 50s horror movie. It needed no batteries and no wires, which is why American sweep teams walked right past it. The State Department didn't find it until 1952. That was the world the CIA lived in. Every wall could be listening. Every gift was a suspect. Both sides swept their embassies like exterminators, and every year the bugs got smaller and the paranoia got bigger. The agency even had a name for this arms race: technical surveillance, and entire careers were spent planting microphones in one city while prying them out of the walls of another. By the 60s, Soviet officers in Washington assumed every indoor room they used was compromised, so they did what careful people do. They took the real conversations outside, to sidewalks and benches and parks where no microphone could follow. Remember that, it matters later. And somewhere in the agency's science and technology shops in the early 1960s, somebody had a thought that must have felt like genius at 2 in the morning. You can sweep a wall, you can x-ray a gift, but nobody sweeps an animal. Animals walk straight past security. Animals sit under park benches where diplomats eat lunch. Animals curl up on embassy windowsills, and nobody files a security memo about it. And of all the animals on Earth, the agency chose the one species famous for ignoring instructions: a cat. To be fair, the logic was solid. Cats go everywhere and belong to no one. A dog in a park draws attention. A pigeon can't get close to a quiet conversation, but a cat can sit 3 feet from 2 Soviet officials for an hour, and the only thing anyone thinks is, look, a cat. Most of what we know comes from one man, Victor Marchetti, a former CIA officer who spent 14 years inside the agency before becoming one of its loudest critics. Decades later, Marchetti described the program on the record, and his account is still the spine of the whole story. The program ran for roughly 5 years, the reported price tag about $20 million. Although, honestly, nobody can verify that number because the paperwork that survived is mostly black ink. $20 million in 1960s money to answer one question: could you turn a living cat into a radio? There was only one way to find out, and it began with a scalpel. Step 1, the surgery. In a laboratory that has never been publicly named, a surgical team opened up a living cat and rebuilt it as hardware. A microphone went into the ear canal, the one spot on a cat where a microphone hears the way an ear hears. A transmitter about 3/4 of an inch long went in at the base of the skull, and a fine wire antenna was woven through the fur, along the spine, all the way down into the tail. The tail was the antenna. Sit with that. Somewhere in America, a federal employee wrote the sentence, "The tail will serve as the antenna," and then clocked out and drove home like a normal person. Batteries were the nightmare. This is the early 60s. A power source small enough to hide inside a cat could only support limited recording, so every design choice was a fight between electronics and anatomy, fought by engineers who were presumably top of their class and were now debugging a mammal. Victor Marchetti later summed up the finished product in 5 words: they made a monstrosity. If you could x-ray the result, it looked like a page from an appliance manual. Item 1, microphone, ear canal. Item 2, transmitter, base of skull. Item 3, antenna, tail. Somewhere that diagram really existed, with an official classification stamp on it. And here's the uncomfortable part. It worked. Power it on, and the cat transmitted live audio. The hardware problem, the one that looked impossible, the CIA actually solved. In tests, handlers could sit in a vehicle and listen to the world through a cat. Somewhere, there may still exist a reel of tape that is mostly the inside of a shrub, recorded at taxpayer expense, at the highest possible classification level. Then they met the software problem. The cat. You can brief an agent. You can program a satellite. A cat is the only intelligence platform in history that receives its mission, holds eye contact, and walks away mid-sentence to look at a bird. Training was supposed to be the easy phase. Walk toward the target. Sit near the voices. Stay. Instead, the handlers discovered what every cat owner has known for 5,000 years. A cat does exactly what it wants, in the order it wants, for reasons it will not be sharing. The killer was hunger. In test after test, the cat would start toward the target like a professional, and then get hungry and simply leave, off mission, gone, looking for lunch. Its priorities, as far as anyone could ever measure, ran food first, birds second, sunbeams third, and the United States of America somewhere below napping. So the program went back in and dealt with the hunger problem too. Accounts differ on exactly how, and the surviving records are too blacked out to say more. What we do know is that they considered walking away, and instead they doubled down, because by now the sunk cost wasn't a fallacy anymore. It was a lifestyle. 5 years this took. 5 years of surgeries, training runs, and progress reports written by people who could never tell their families what they did at work. Somewhere in a filing cabinet, there was a folder where the asset refused to leave the sofa, counted as an intelligence setback. And yet, slowly, genuinely, it got better. By the mid-60s, the lab results were finally respectable. The cat could move short distances on cue. The audio came through clean enough to use. On paper, heavily redacted paper, Acoustic Kitty was operational. There was even quiet talk of what could come next. If a cat could carry a microphone, what else could walk a payload past a checkpoint? The 60s were not a decade overly burdened by the question, should we, which left one thing missing. A real mission against a real target in the open air of an American city, where the agency could not control a single variable. And the target they picked was the Soviet compound on Wisconsin Avenue. The lab said the asset was ready. Headquarters signed off. All that was left was the van ride. Remember the 2 men in the van whispering at a cat? Everything you've watched so far, the surgery, the training, the $20 million, existed for the next 90 seconds, because in the mid-60s, Acoustic Kitty finally got a mission. The plan, as Marchetti described it, was almost elegant. Across the street from the Soviet compound on Wisconsin Avenue sat a public space where Soviet personnel walked, sat, and talked. If a stray cat drifted in and settled near the right bench, it would simply be part of the scenery. A warm, purring, government-issue surveillance platform. There was no cover story that survives a wired cat. If the Soviets had ever found the animal, the propaganda would have written itself. America, land of the free, home of the surgically altered house pet. So the entire operation had to be perfectly deniable, which is a strange thing to demand of a creature that answers to no one. Think about the meeting where this got approved. Somewhere in Langley, a man in a suit stood in front of other men in suits and said, "We will park the vehicle here and deploy the cat here." And everyone nodded, and someone took minutes, and those minutes stayed classified for decades, possibly out of pure embarrassment. First came the rehearsals, test runs, release the asset, track the signal, recover the asset. Handlers sat in vehicles with headphones, listening to America through a cat. The technology held, the procedures held. The only unpredictable component was the component with whiskers. And understand what success would have meant. If that cat settles under the right bench, the van is recording Soviet officials speaking freely, outdoors, in the one place on Earth they believed no microphone could follow. The idea was never stupid. The idea was just 20 years early, and one species off. Picture the 2 men assigned to that van. Years of tradecraft, clearances most of the government will never hold, and their operational orders, reduced to their essence, were, follow the cat. So one day, the exact date has never been made public, an unmarked van pulled up near the park. Inside, handlers, monitoring equipment, and one cat carrying more electronics than the van was. They ran the final checks. Signal, good. Audio, good. asset awake. Marchetti never named the men inside, and no public record ever has. Two anonymous professionals, receivers live, every breath of static audible, about to supervise the strangest deployment in the history of American intelligence. They opened the door, and for one moment, one glorious $20 million moment, it was all real. An American surveillance animal was on the ground, in public, pointed at the Soviet Union. The cat stepped out. It crossed the sidewalk. It reached the road, and a taxi hit it. That is the story Victor Marchetti told. In his account, the cat was struck almost immediately, before it ever reached the other side. The men in the van watched 5 years of work end on a Washington street. In Marchetti's words, there they were, sitting in the van, and the cat was dead. By his telling, the team recovered what was left, because classified hardware cannot be abandoned in a public street, and drove back to headquarters in silence. There is no training for the meeting that came next. In 1967, the program was formally shut down. The verdict, after 5 years and a mountain of unaccountable money, not practical. There was no press release because officially there was no program. The cages were cleared, the equipment was logged, and one of the strangest chapters in American intelligence was quietly filed away, where it would sleep for more than 30 years. And here's the contrast that should break your brain a little. This was the same agency that, at the very same time, was flying Corona spy satellites, cameras in orbit, photographing the entire Soviet Union from space, dropping film back to Earth in capsules that American planes snatched out of the sky in midair. That system worked, routinely. The satellites worked. That was the 60s agency in one frame. It could engineer miracles and absurdities off the same budget line, sometimes with the same people, and nobody in the building could reliably tell you which was which until the invoice arrived. The satellites could photograph a bomber from 100 miles up. The cat made it about 10 feet. For the next 3 decades, that was the whole legend. The taxi, the dead cat, the perfect punchline to the Cold War's strangest program. It got passed around intelligence circles like folklore, and when it finally reached the public, every newspaper printed the same ending. Except there's a problem with the punchline. The man who ran the CIA's own gadget shop says it never happened. Fast forward to 2001, a national security researcher named Jeffrey Richelson pried loose one of the only surviving documents through the Freedom of Information Act. It is a CIA memo from 1967, and it carries one of the greatest titles in the history of paperwork, Views on Trained Cats. Most of it is redacted, black bars over black bars. Even part of the title around the word cats is blacked out, so we do not officially know trained cats for what. Richelson's team at the National Security Archive published it anyway, because even the black bars tell a story. Somewhere under that ink are names, dates, and a final bill, and none of it may ever surface. But the conclusion survived. The memo concedes that cats can indeed be trained to move short distances, and then it concludes in flawless bureaucratic deadpan that using the technique in a real foreign situation would simply not be practical. And then, this is real, the memo closes by praising the team. It says the work reflects great credit on the people who guided it and salutes their energy and imagination. Energy and imagination about wiring a cat. Then, in 2008, came the twist. Robert Wallace, the former director of the CIA's Office of Technical Service, the gadget shop itself, went on the record about Acoustic Kitty. And according to Wallace, the taxi story is a myth. In his version, there was no dramatic death. The program was judged impractical, the equipment was removed, the cat was sewn back up, and it went on to live an ordinary cat life, presumably with the best security clearance in the neighborhood. So which ending is true, the taxi or the retirement? Nobody outside the agency knows. The records that could settle it are destroyed or blacked out, and the only first-hand accounts point in opposite directions. The cat took the answer with it, which, honestly, is the most professional conduct any intelligence asset has ever displayed. But here's the part that actually matters. The CIA spent 5 years and a reported $20 million trying to build one microphone that could get close to people without raising suspicion. And it failed, because you cannot brief a cat. 60 years later, nobody has to. In 2006, DARPA began funding cyborg insects, microchips grown into living beetles. But even that was solving yesterday's problem. Because in 2014, Amazon started selling a microphone that people place in their own living rooms on purpose, and there are now more than 500 million Alexa-enabled devices in the world. There is probably a microphone within 10 feet of you right now. Nobody performed surgery. Nobody trained anything. You bought it. It was on sale. The agency's mistake was never the ambition, it was the timing. They tried to sneak the microphone in. All they had to do was wait 60 years, and we would carry it in ourselves and complain when the battery died. If you want more real history like this, real experiments, real documents, real institutional insanity, subscribe, because next time, the intelligence world trained a raven to land on windowsills and plant listening devices, and unlike the cat, the raven was good at its job.